Welcome to day 4, session 4 of Let the Waters Fall retreat. Today we're going to be talking about one of the layers of trauma, and that's how trauma can affect the way that we perceive ourselves. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the traumas that happened in my life, and I'm not going to share one of the greatest traumas, which was the trauma of my dad losing his legs. But I'm going to go back just a few years prior to when I lost my beloved pet. I was 13 years old, and my dad, also an obvious dog lover, picked out a golden lab puppy for me. He was just weaned when I got him Christmas morning. And he and I immediately loved each other. My face was wet with sloppy kisses, and I had always loved dogs. And I'd had other dogs before that, but Sonny and I had a bond that I have not had with an animal since. We only had him for a short while. He was with us for 6 months of his life, and while I was on vacation, he was hit by a car. The crazy thing about that was the moment he died, I fell to my knees and screamed out his name. And I was hundreds of miles away. I don't know why that happened. All I know is that the bond that we had was really strong. That time in my life was probably when my emotions were, I was 13, when my emotions were all over the place. I was finding it difficult to control how I felt about things. If something bothered me, it just felt like 5 times worse than what had actually happened. And I just didn't feel like I was okay. When I had called my parents to see how Sonny was, because I had a feeling that something had happened, they said that everything was fine. And honestly, from that moment on, everything was not fine. I went deeper into a spiral of emotional turmoil to the point where I started to self-harm. And it's interesting because years later, I had realized that what I was doing was self-harm, and self-injurious behavior is not necessarily just cutting. I think we're educating ourselves more about what self-injurious behavior really is, because it's anything that we do against our body that causes harm. So for me, it wasn't cutting. When I would get really, really angry, I would punch a wall that had cement behind it, or I would pound my fists into the floor, and I would have bruises down my arm. I would pull out my hair. I would scratch my skin, or I would carve into my skin. And so that's what self-harm looked like for me. But I know other people who've experienced self-harm will starve themselves, will keep themselves from having any friends. There's so many different ways. It's basically when we hate ourselves so much that we cause harm to ourselves, to our body. And so we all have forms of self-hatred that pop up when we've done something wrong, or when when something has been done against us, or when life just happens and we feel kind of like out of control. So I fell into a habit of self-harming, and for a while I felt suicidal. And here's an explanation kind of what self-harm feels like, or at least the actions leading up to self-harm. For me, I was trying to describe it in a way that would make sense to someone who hasn't self-harmed before. And it's almost like all of your veins in your body are just feeling torn apart. It's like an emotional surge that has no escape. And so for anyone who self-harms, they take one point in their body. So for me, it was these sides of my wrist, like pounding on something, or my knuckles pounding into something. It would be like that would become the focus point, and then everything would be let out, and then we could relax. It was like we weren't trapped anymore. And I was thinking about like two reasons why I don't self-harm today. One of the reasons is because I've found a coping mechanism where I numb myself and kind of paralyze myself so that I don't injure myself. So it's kind of like a protection of some sort. And the other reason why I don't self-harm anymore is because a lot of the lies that I've believed that caused me to hurt myself to get rid of the pain have been healed. And I've talked to high school students about this because it's really common for girls especially to self-harm. And so I've told them, like, I understand what that feels like and how painful it is, but talking through it and healing through what you're actually feeling is going to help you more than anything. And I still believe that today. It's part of the reason why I want to help other women and help other people work through their healing, because we can become less hating ourselves, and we can see the opportunity that God has for us to be who we've been created to be. Because if the enemy can make us be convinced that we're worthless and that we don't have value, then it'll stop us from reaching out and from ministering to others, or shining the light where we need to be a light. So trauma always has a lie for us, and one layer is how we see ourselves. And if you think back to session 1, and if you haven't seen session 1 yet, I would recommend that you go back to session 1. And that was where we discussed in trials how the choices we make have affected some trials in our life. Oftentimes those lies that we believe about ourselves come up when we are facing a trauma. So lies that I believed when Sunny had died is that it was all my fault, that I should have been there, that I could have helped him, I wasn't there when he needed me the most, how foolish was I to leave, things like that. And so what's interesting is that those lies that I believed, and I think that they're even further back than just that incident, but they came up when my dad's accident had happened. I should have known. I was out enjoying myself with my friends. I should have known that something was wrong. I should have been there. I wouldn't say it was all my fault, but just not knowing and feeling like that connection with my dad wasn't there because I didn't know was really hard. So in our journaling time, I want you to think about this. So even if you think that moment that the trauma happened or that incident happened, that those lies came to the surface for the first time, it's probably not the case. And so I want you to go with that list from session 1 of the lies that we believe about ourselves, and ask God when it was the first time those messages happened, or maybe one that stood out to you when the first time that message happened. Kind of like the conversational prayer that we did in session 2, I think it was, asking him who we need to forgive. Okay, so we didn't do that in session 2, I just remembered now. So here's what I want to say. We didn't have a perfect upbringing. Some of us had a really hard upbringing. Some of us had only one parent in our home. Some of us had a very absent but present parent in our home. Some of us just had a lot of turmoil in our home. Everybody's upbringing is different, and even if we had good parents, we all faced trauma in our lives and hardships in our lives. So if you look at the list of lies, it might have been a parent that either said that about themselves or said that about towards you, or it could have been an older sibling that made you feel that way. It could have been a teacher. It could have been a close childhood friend or even a classmate. It could be a number of people that have been in your life. And so what I want you to do during the journal time is to take an incident or an isolated lie from session 1, or maybe just one that he brings up now, and ask him when that happened. So the journaling I will put also below in the description, and I'll put it in our event page. So since you've already probably identified a trauma that has come up during these sessions, look back to the lies that you believed, and then once you have that list, choose one that really stands out to you. Something that really pulls at your heart or breaks your heart when you read it or when you see it. Then we're going to go back into conversational prayer, and these are the 3 questions that I want you to ask. So number 1, what was the incident when you first believed the lie? Number 2, who was there? And who do you need to forgive? Sometimes it's ourselves and the other people that were involved in that situation. I had to forgive myself with Sunny, and I didn't even realize I had to forgive my parents because they were there when it happened. But I felt like the accusations were more strongly against me. So sometimes you have to forgive yourself in those circumstances. And then after you've gone through that process of forgiving yourself and telling your younger self or telling the other people how you forgive them, ask for Jesus's truth in those moments. If you want to bring him into that scenario, just like we did in session 2, you can do that. If you just want to hear what his truths are for that moment, that would also be very healing. So I hope you have a good journaling time. I recommend that you listen to the Spotify list that I've created in our event page, and I'll put a link to that also in the description below. And just spend some time with him. This can be a really sensitive, hard thing to go through, but the more that we attack the lies of the enemy and hear Jesus's truth, the more that we can pull up that truth when those lies come back, because the enemy just wants to target you again and again. And so if you have, it's almost like an armor, right? We have his truth. We have the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, the shield of faith, and the belt buckled with truth. So there's more, more in the armor of God, Ephesians 6. The more that we have truth in this, the more that we can fight the enemy against these lies that can create more hardship and more pain. So be blessed, and I pray that God would speak to you the truths that you need to hear today. Bye.